Jim's here.
Yeah, he's lurking.
All right.
I went to the Plymouth Christmas Eve for the first time. Oh, I shouldn't be
Oh,
talking.
I was planning on it.
Okay. All right. Greetings in the name of Christ, everybody, from the Michigan Conference here. This is Lillian Daniel. I'm with you from my home office in Grand Rapids, and New Year's blessings to you all. Let's open with a prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this time to be together. We recognize the heavy burdens that your people carry, the lay leaders in the church, the pastors, the preachers, all those who labor for you. We give you thanks this day for generosity and for the ability to ask one another to contribute and to be as generous as you have created us to be. And we ask this blessing in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Welcome, everybody. We have a great group on here today. Our topic is Honey Who Shrank the Church Budget, or Faithfully Facing Our Finances, where everything begins with F. And these Zoom conversations that I've been doing as conference minister always come out of the questions that I hear when I visit churches. And when I visit a church, I might preach, but I also visit with the lay leaders. I go on a tour of the building. And when you go on a tour of the building, you often start to hear about resources. Here's the boiler room, and we are looking at a huge expense for a new boiler, or we just did the roof, or there's some water damage over here. You start to hear about those stresses. And when I came to Michigan in the summer of 2022, I heard an interesting financial story. I expected to hear a lot of hardship, but what a lot of people reported from our Michigan churches is that during COVID, they expected it to be a financial disaster, and it was not as bad as they expected. That there were people whose jobs were in jeopardy, or if you're working in the restaurant industry, things like that, your income was unstable. But there were other people in our churches who said, I recognize that and I can step forward. And in many cases, those were some of our retired people in the congregations. But what I'm hearing in the last year is that things are hard financially, because after that, as we got back into quote unquote normal, whatever that is, the stock market crashed. And that hit the very members who had stepped up during COVID. And as any church member or pastor knows, it takes a lot of new members to make up in terms of financial generosity for what a long-term member gives in many cases. So as I've gone around to churches and we've heard about things like this, I thought, who better to invite to join us than my friend and colleague, Reverend Andy DeBraber. Andy lives in Michigan, is one of our Michigan Conference clergy, and has served churches in Michigan, most recently Douglas, UCC. But he has been working for the national staff of the church in philanthropy. It seems like we always change the names of these things. Is it stewardship? Is it generosity? Is it development? Is it fundraising? Right now it's philanthropy. And Andy has been a great partner to me in my ministry here to help me understand how the national church raises money and for what, and to also help me to understand how important it is to talk about these matters, not just with the clergy or church leaders, but with each other. So having said that, I'm going to welcome Andy and invite him to give us a little starter to get us going.
Sure. Thanks, Lillian. It's great to be here. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. I can't believe February 1 is going to be 7 years that I've been working at the national setting as a generosity officer. And it's been a great time. It's been a time of transition and learning for the national setting to do fundraising in a different way. We lived in a time when we just expected people to give to churches, churches gave to conferences, and conferences gave to national, and everybody was happy and everybody's boats were floating and rising. But as you all know, that's been changing over the past few decades. And so we've needed to change and adapt with that. One of the things, as you were talking about the past few years, Lillian, that I've thought a lot about and talked with a number of churches about is also inflation. I mean, inflation over the last 2 years is, I think, 15% or more. And, most of our givers don't go, guess I should inflate my gift by 15% to make up for all those cost increases. How do we talk about that in our churches? Do we? I mean, I don't think we lead with it. I don't think we lead with, inflation, so you need to give more. That might motivate this many people, but I think it's a part of the conversation. For me, the conversation is really around mission. What is your mission as a congregation? What are you doing in the community? What are you doing with your members? So often we're good about talking about what we're doing in the community as churches, but we're not good necessarily at telling the stories about what we're doing with our congregation and in the lives of individuals and families and people in our congregations. How do we tell those stories? Because that's, as you know, if you're clergy or leadership or personally, where lives are transformed and changed in incredible ways. And so learning to tell and inviting other people to tell those stories. When I hear those stories, that's when I want to get, the church changed my life and here's how. The church saved my life and here's how. I love this church because it walked with my family through this really difficult time. I was just telling Lillian, if you had asked me if I'd be in fundraising 10, 15 years ago, I'd be like, no way. but I had a relatively new member when I was a pastor at Douglas, and it was coming around the end of the budget year, probably October, we had a calendar year budget, and we were projecting like an $18,000 deficit and probably a $110,000 budget. And this new member came up and said, "That's not going to happen. We're gonna close that gap." And he said, "I'm going to give 5,000 to start with, and I believe in our mission. We love our mission, and if we don't have the money, then we can't do our mission. So we need the money to accomplish our mission." And he said, "We're going to go meet with other folks who we believe can make a larger gift to this first." And I think we managed to raise about $12,000-13,000 that way, and then took it to the congregation and said, "These people have stepped up, and now will you please join them?" And we were able to close that budget gap that year. And then he said, "And then we need a plan for next year." We had never done a stewardship campaign. And so we put a stewardship campaign in place and emphasized that year round. So I've been growing in this process ever since, and really come to love the fact that people can make a difference in the world through giving their money, just like they can by being Sunday school teachers and liturgists, and all kinds of ways that people change the world through, as we say, their time, talent, and treasure. We're just not good at talking about treasure in the church very much.
Treasure. It sounds like pirates. So Andy, we were talking about the fact that you and I, neither one of us received any training in our seminary experience. And I am going to ask the group for a reaction. If you received any training in this area, raise your hand. Give a thumbs up. That's not many. That's not many. And for lay people in the group, have you ever received any training in fundraising or stewardship in church settings? All right. So here we are, getting some training. Many of us, I think, if we were pastors or lay people, probably got trained by somebody who'd had experience in it. I know that I was told by the senior pastor that I worked with when I was associate. He said, "You've got to get over your fear of asking people for money." And he said, "I look at it as a favor. I'm giving them an opportunity to be generous. You can't look at it like you're asking them to do something that's unpleasant." And he said, "But first you have to believe that. You have to derive pleasure from giving yourself." And that was a challenge to me. I had to really sort through that, because I don't know about you, but in my family, I was raised that you weren't supposed to talk about money.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Anybody
Yeah.
else raised like that? Yeah, that it was bad manners or crass or inappropriate to do that. And then we don't get trained in it. And then we're sent out to churches. And then sometimes in our churches, there's a culture among the lay leaders of also not talking about money, because we were all raised in these families, right? So when I was at a church in New Haven, they literally had a practice. They would collect the offering plates, and then they would take them out of the church and put them outside the sanctuary in this little closet on a shelf as soon as it had been collected. It was like they didn't want to sully the beautiful spiritual sanctuary with the gifts. So they literally put it on the shelf, out of sight, out of mind. And in my mind, COVID has changed this, but collection of the offertory is one of the most awkward moments in our churches. Because the reality is most of our generous givers give in other ways, with a check or automatic withdrawal, as Jesus intended. And that plate gets passed around. And if you look at what's in the plate and you're a visitor to the church or a newcomer, you'd say, "Oh, apparently it takes $20 to run the church," because that's what you see in the plate. And there's this awkwardness about it. How do we push through that, Andy?
Yeah. Well, I think the other reality that needs to be named, Lillian, is that most churches in America rely on one or two or maybe a handful of large donors who provide a third to a half of the church's budget. So there's a small group that is funding the majority of the church. And so how do we relate to them? And how do we then, when it comes to passing a plate, how do we communicate that there is more than what you see in there, Are we regularly talking about how much is coming in every month? You know, some people put that on in the bulletin, up on a board, put financial reports maybe on a bulletin board, send those out in your emails. Some churches even post them on their website. They have their financial reports up there. I remember one church I was at, and I had a chance to thank them for their giving to OCWM and the UCC and things at the national setting. And it was just after their budget year had closed, and they posted their financial records online, and they had finished in the black. So I congratulated them. I'm like, great job. You raised enough money. You finished in the, I don't know how many people came up after me and said, you should not have said that. People aren't going to give now because they thought they know we got too much money last year. I'm like, no, you have more money to do more exciting things with your mission. And people want to give to something that is succeeding. I mean, why does Harvard have more money than a lot of small nations? You know, it's not because they're a sinking ship and nobody's giving to them. People want to give to something that they see has life and is giving life to people and their communities. But yeah, that passing the plate, which, as you said, we've changed. Those are often difficult moments. I served also at Heartside Ministry, walking alongside unsheltered, unhoused folks. We had a worship service every Sunday, and we passed the plate. And if I forgot to pass the plate, the people there made sure we did it. They wanted that opportunity, like you said. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's the donors who I work with now who are giving 5, 10, 20, 50,000 a year to the UCC, who say, I am so grateful for the opportunity to give, or the folks who were living in extreme poverty, who wanted to give what they could there. Or we also just said, touch the plate as you pass it, as a symbol of giving your whole self to this community, to God, to one another.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that. And a lot of churches have not gone back to passing the plate. It's one of the things that we switched in COVID. And I think I personally, I know we have different opinions on it, but I don't miss it. I think it is kind of an awkward moment. I think you should have a moment of offertory and thanksgiving and prayer. But that plate with no money in it is just.
We were just having this, I think it was Thanksgiving table. We were having this conversation. My mother-in-law is 82, and she's like, oh, yes, you know, I miss being able to write that check and put it in the offering plate. And my daughter, who's 20.
Oh, no, in the special envelope with their special number on it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And special colors for special days. And designated if you want. And my daughter, who's, 22, is like, maybe I write a check a year. I don't, why would you do that? And my mother-in-law totally could not understand how my daughter could find meaning in giving through her phone or giving, electronically on a regular basis. So there's a real generational conversation that needs to happen about how people find meaning in giving in different ways.
The best advice I've heard is just give people multiple points of entry. For the person who wants to write a check, or the person who wants an envelope, I'll make you an envelope. But also have multiple ways to give. I find that it's really frustrating when you go to a service, and sometimes this happens to us as the clergy, where we'll be at an installation or something, and we don't have our wallet with us, and they say there's now going to be a collection for seminarians or something, and it looks like all of us who went to seminary are too stingy to give. And there's got to be an easier way. But let's talk about some of the weird things that churches do to get in their own way of raising money. Let's talk about the poinsettias, Andy.
Right.
Give us
yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe you all, a number of churches, invite people to give money to buy poinsettias for the Christmas season. They pay 10, 20, 30 bucks for points, and they can take it home afterwards, and they get their name listed in the bulletin. And maybe if they want to honor somebody or give it in memory of somebody, their name is listed. So man, if I make a $25 gift for a poinsettia, which some of it goes to pay for the poinsettia, I get honored in the bulletin. But if I'm your average churchgoer who's giving $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 a year to the church, I never get a thank you publicly, certainly. Maybe not from the pastor if the pastor doesn't know who gives what. And so how do we balance actually thanking people? I mean, I find that in churches, it's one of the things I learned working in the nonprofit world. We're so good in the nonprofit world at thanking people on a regular basis. Some might say we overthank. I don't think that's possible. But in the church, we definitely underthank. I mean,
Yeah.
writing a handwritten note to all of your members who give, thanking them, and then also to members who volunteer and do other things, and you just catch out of the corner of your eye doing something that nobody else sees, can make
Mhm.
such a difference.
But also, don't you think, and sometimes in church life, we make a big ask about the wrong things or about small things. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
stand up and ask everybody to buy baked goods and cupcakes and cookies to support the kids to go on a mission trip, but we don't devote that time to the annual budget that could fund the mission trip. That was the big learning for me as a pastor, was to have one message to try to get people to donate to the annual budget of the church because the church is meaningful. When I started in the ministry, there was this weird notion that the church was kind of a united way, and people should give to the church because the church then turns around and gives X percentage to Habitat for Humanity and this and that. And these days, if you want to give to Habitat for Humanity, you can do that directly. And I think we've got to learn how to make a case and say, in the same way that an educational institution does, the same way Harvard does, or University of Michigan does, they say, this is a meaningful institution and we ask for your support, as opposed to give to Harvard, because then we'll give 2% to Princeton. Doesn't make
Right.
any sense.
Yeah, and it's a both and, right? I mean, it's raising money for the annual fund on a regular basis. I mean, you need to have a year-round stewardship program, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But then it's also offering those opportunities throughout the year where people can make a spontaneous gift to a mission project, to a part of the church budget. Even you can have spontaneous giving to fund your music program or your children's program. Have a special offering for that. It doesn't have to be a special offering for Habitat for Humanity or the other groups that we support. But
No special offerings. I mean, your church offering is special.
yeah,
I mean, if
right.
everybody supports the church, then we're able to do things. And part of it, I think, also is to work with the congregation to say, and when we don't have enough, we can't do certain things.
Mhm.
So
Or we
that,
asked more. I mean, right? We did that recently. We had a budget deficit of the church that we're a part of. We went out and said, "Hey, we need to close this budget deficit," and people gave to meet it. I think a lot of people in our congregations have set the amount that they're going to give to the church about 15 years ago, and they're giving $100 a month, and that's what they started giving 15 years ago. And we haven't asked them to give more. I mean, maybe they got a letter that said, "Would you think about giving 7% more?" And they're like, "I can't do that math. So I'm just going to keep giving what I'm giving." Whereas if I know they've been giving $100 a year for 15 years, I can go to them and say, would you consider giving $200 a month? Or would you make a special gift this year of two or four or $5,000? We
and
just
multiple
tend
opportunities to give to multiple things, right? So we have a question in the chat or a comment about, there's a church that's starting a building fund. Or what about churches that have an endowment? There are people who are never going to give to an endowment, and there are people who are probably only going to give to an endowment.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
it's a mix. There are churches where they wait for a hole in the roof, and then you stand up and say the roof has a hole in it, and every single person pitches in and it gets fixed. But you have other people who say, I don't know if I want to give to an organization that allowed the roof to cave in.
Yeah. I think it's just really important that churches that have an endowment or are trying to create one. I mean, I think most churches at this point in their life should be doing that, but are just very transparent about how much is in it and what it's used for. So if your congregation knows exactly what it's used for, they know that you can't go in there to fix the roof or to fill the church budget or exactly what it's intended for.
Mhm.
And that's endowments are often funded by gifts when people pass away, kind of those planned gifts, and that's an investment in a long-term plan. you know However, it has the most return of any ask, right? I mean,
Yes. And it's the easiest gift to give because you won't miss it. Right? The bequest. But I think another comment in the chat was, how do we get people to understand that, yeah, this is what it takes to run the church? I think I know what you're going to say, Andy, but say it.
oh well, curious. No, I think we organize our budgets around our mission. So, have you can call it a narrative budget, or you can just do your line item budget that way. So it's here's the areas that we spend, and then tell a story every week. I'd have somebody get up every week and say, this is why I love this church, or this is why I give to this church. And then you don't think about, oh, I'm giving to keep the lights on. I'm giving to pay the pastor's salary. I'm giving to pay the mortgage. Some of you might know my coworker, Andrew Warner, our generosity outreach officer. And he talks about churches that are Motel 6 churches. We're keeping the lights on for you. He's like, I think we can be a lot more than Motel 6 churches.
Yes, yes. Or churches that only talk about physical plant needs.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see churches that will invest in physical plant needs, but not in the pastor's salary.
Yeah. And there's a real serious consideration. I'm sure you've had this conversation only with many churches in Michigan already about that physical plant. Sometimes that becomes the most sacred item in the congregation, and that's all we're concerned about. And that's what we're pouring 75% of our resources into. And maybe we need to decide we need to move on. We need to do something different with this. We need to partner with other organizations. We need to turn it into senior low-income housing or whatever. There's all kinds of opportunities that can be really exciting for mission. And you know what? There's a whole bunch of empty buildings waiting for us to meet in.
Well, and Andy, one of the things I appreciate that I hear you say a lot is that we need to treat our churches like the spiritually mature grown-ups that they are and tell them what's going on with the finances, to be transparent, to not hide it from them or assume that they know, but to, because people are intelligent. And if you are honest about what the annual budget is, they can look around and see how many people are there and figure out kind of where they fit in that.
Right. And being honest, like you said, about, okay, if we're going to cut the annual budget, then we need to say what's being cut. It's not just it's not doing more with less. We've done that. Most churches are, they're operating at a very efficient level. It's hard to cut anything at this point when the money is less. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to open this question up to the group, but I want you to answer it too. So group, this is a controversial one, but do you believe it is best practices in this financial world for the pastor or the executive director of a nonprofit, chair of the board, to know who gives what to the church? Let's just do a poll for fun of the group. Who says yes, the leaders should know? And who says no? Excellent. Because I am psychic and I know what Andy's going to answer on this question, and I'll let him here. Does somebody who think you shouldn't know, one of the no votes, want to jump in and say why?
Yeah, I'll speak to that one. The reason why I think it unfortunately unconsciously biased the way I do ministry. I think I would have a very difficult time separating who I need to people please and who I don't. And I think I would end up evaluating members by what they give. And I don't think that's a fair. I would rather not know and be able to be objective about it. That's just my feeling.
Excellent. Anyone else want to jump in? Yes. I think that's Stephanie. Is that Stephanie?
So when I was living in Florida, two things. I had somebody that, and I was starting to write in the chat, that would literally go past me on Sunday mornings to greet people that potentially were giving much more than I ever could. I'm a single person. I afford my own healthcare. I have abilities and disabilities. And there is some unspoken privilege and bias around bodies that are able or disabled when it comes to giving. And when I lived in Tampa, sorry, my phone loves to ring when I'm talking. Either work-wise or otherwise. There was a big push around prosperity gospel. And I started my career working with people who are homeless. And right, wrong, or indifferent, some were told that if they gave everything they could, that God would then take them from being unhoused to housed. And I think there are a lot of there's so many different messages and meanings that go into money. I will state that I know that I deserved the same greeting as anyone else in the congregation, regardless of what I gave or how my body came into church. But that was my experience. And I've thought a lot about in search and call, and I'm doing online public supply, how I approach giving, because I've had friends visit every week that, they share with me one of the harder points for them is the notion that they have an idea about church and money because of their own experiences. So I'm glad that we're having this open conversation, because it's an ongoing conversation, and there are many, many parts, as there are people that God creates and loves.
Thanks for that cautionary note, because I think every one of us has a picture of that prosperity, name it and claim it message that takes advantage of people. I mean, that's our worst nightmare, that we would do that.
There's a lot of bad theology out there, period, and there's a lot of bad theology out there about money, for sure.
And yet I think, so I remember in ministry at one point, do any of you remember the book of Jabez? It was a very popular prosperity gospel book. I think it's probably the stupidest book ever written in Christian history. It's, name it and claim it, magical thinking. If you repeat this one, expand my fields, this obscure verse from the Bible, you will have all this wealth. And it just represents kind of this, just stupid theology. And I thought nobody in my church would ever agree with that or whatever. And I remember I was shocked when a church member came up to me and said, I really appreciate your sermon today, and it reminds me of this wonderful book, The Prayer of Jabez. And I was so upset. I thought, I didn't say anything having to do with that. But what I realized when I thought about it was that obviously I hadn't said anything about money. Because if this parishioner thought that I agreed with the prayer of Jabez, clearly I wasn't talking about money enough. And I recognized in myself that I had been scared to approach the topic. And if I'm scared to approach the topic, then they're going to go out and get the book at the bookstore that says the opposite message.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anybody want to make an argument for why the leadership of the church should know who gives what? I see Jacoba there.
Several reasons. One is, I know if somebody's giving changes, I know that I need to check on them. Maybe they're giving change because they're upset with me or somebody in the church, or they're suddenly having a downturn in their own finances, and I need to be able to support them. And if they've done, in other churches, not this one, they've done a pledge, I need to say, it's okay. If you can't make up your pledge, don't worry about it. Do what you can. I've also had, I've known a couple, I've never had one that did a third or a half of the congregation that I know of the budget. But at least 10%, maybe 10 to 20%. And I wanted to know that for a couple of reasons. One, if this person was aging and soon to leave the congregation, we were going to lose a whole lot of money that would strike our budget. Also, this was a person who had quite a temper and would get angry with me over, I never knew what was going to happen. And so, yes, this is somebody that I did go and have a cup of coffee with, and part of that was because I knew where her giving was. the same time, there were people that I knew did not give or did not give much. And I was at the hospital with them as much or even more than I was with the big givers, because they needed my presence too, and I didn't think twice about it. So, you know, right now I have somebody who's not a part of the church, and would not give the church anything, didn't give the church anything for a funeral we did for her wife. I mean, didn't give not only me, not anything, gave nothing to the church for the funeral. His mother's dying. I'm still going to the nursing home to visit. You know, that's what you do. You pastor to the entire congregation, but you need to be aware where the gifts are coming from. And I've wanted to support kids that do camp. If I know who's got some money to give to the church, I can go to them and say, hey, so-and-so wants to go to church camp. I'll pay part of it. Would you pay part of it too? You know, it would really be helpful if, you know, and so that tells me where I can find some money if necessary.
Mhm.
Who is already generous? That's an important piece to know. Who are your generous givers? You know, and they may not be the ones that you think, you know, would know unless you saw the ledgers. And this church does not want me to see the ledgers. And this church does not want to do stewardship. And this church does not want me to talk about money. I'm hoping to change that. But because they are financially in trouble, big trouble.
That's really interesting. Andy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, you asked me earlier. I mean, I think just when churches talk about money, it tends to go better. But I do think your last point there, Jacoba, about I think we as pastors have an implicit bias whether we know what people give or not. We think we know what people give. I worked with a small church in Indiana recently. Pastor's been there 6 or 7 years, and by working with him in their church, he started to look at who gave what and was surprised.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now he knows the truth about who gives what and not who he thinks gives what because of what they look or what they drive or what houses they have or whatever else. He knows the truth. And it's set him free in a lot of ways.
I've experienced that. I've had real surprises. And a lot of times the whole church sort of assumes, oh, this family funds everything, you know, just because they may own a business in the town or something. So people sort of assume. And I've had the incredible surprise of the person who steps forward with the massive gift who actually lives very modestly and has been a saver or whatnot. And a lot of it is until you ask about a project, you don't know. I had a situation in my last church where we did not have an elevator. And I said, let's do a study on what it would cost and let's put that together. And the church believed it would cost $1 million. That was what was out there. And we found out it could cost us less, but probably $500,000 because it was an old building with floors that didn't match up and all that. And but I said, let's do the study and put it out there. And this individual came forward who nobody would have predicted was able to fund 2/3 of that and said, let's get this going. And it had to do with the fact that his late wife had always wished that they had an elevator at the church, and this was how he was going to honor her.
Yeah. I have people who are giving larger gifts to the national church, and when I go visit them in their church, their pastor is so surprised that that's the one I'm there to visit, because it's not the one they expect is giving that size gift that I would come visit with them.
And a lot of times it's pastors who are very generous. So one comment is, you know, in some churches you find out as the pastor that you're giving the biggest gift. And what do we do with that information?
I know that there are some pastors, now this is on the cutting edge, but who will say during stewardship season, this is my pledge, this is what I'm giving to the church, and everybody knows their salary because that's in the budget. So that can be really inspiring to folks, because you're right. Often we as pastors are among the largest givers, even though often our income is not among the largest in the congregation. But as somebody responded, was it Jen, in the email or in the chat, the pastor really believes in the church.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
see Katie up there. Oh, unmute Katie.
Does it matter if it's the pastor asking for increase in offertory, or if it makes a difference if the laypersons volunteer to do that more often than the pastor?
Oh,
I
Andy.
always say it's whoever has the best relationship. So I'd balance it and do both. I mean, a lot of times speaking from a pastor's perspective, I love it when lay people do it, because it often, especially in a small church, feels like I'm asking for my own compensation here.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I would prefer if somebody else did the asking once in a while rather than just the pastor.
Yeah, and that's a great way to train lay people in talking about money, and to train the church in talking about money. Yeah, I know we're running towards time, I think. So I want to make sure, Lillian, that we get in those plugs that you wanted to about.
Oh, yes. So yes, we always try to have conversation, but also provide resources. And so part of the impetus to bring Andy here is that the national setting is offering some trainings. And one of the requests I get a lot of is trainings for church treasurers or whoever deals with finances in local churches. We call it different things. So this is a training coming up. And Andy, why don't you tell us about some of these resources?
Yeah, so that one's coming up for very, very tangible, specific people who work with money, whatever they're called, treasurers, financial secretaries, trustees, etc. Great, really specific, helpful pieces there. And then there's a whole series every month or every other month that we put on, and you can find that. Jen linked to it in our Michigan Conference newsletter. That link you just put up may go there as well. And then I believe it starts in February, we're offering again our Cultivating Generous Congregations workshop, which I know some of you have been through. It's a six session workshop, hour-and-a-half sessions, and about that much work in between for you. Great booklet, great resources. We work with the Lilly School of Philanthropy, their Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. And the churches that have gone through that, we get testimony after testimony that says that their generosity in the congregation has increased. So I'd really encourage you to do that. There's a fee to it. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I know you can maybe ask somebody for help if you need to.
If anybody cannot afford the fee, please approach the Michigan Conference. We do have resources to help you with that.
And then there's a stewardship library online as well at the ucc.org website, stewardship and generosity resources. And it's full of all kinds of great resources to read, short videos, which are great to use with your church council, stewardship committees, finance committees. It's really just chock full of really helpful resources.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always adding to it.
And being plain spoken and open. I forget who, I think it was Jacoba who referenced the individual who didn't offer any money to the church around a funeral or whatnot. But a lot of times we have to remember people have no idea. They don't know that the church runs on the gifts of the members. They may have come from another religious tradition where they assume that the church is funded from some hierarchy that makes it possible, or they assume that the two richest people in the church run everything, or I don't know what they think. But if we can push through and be really open with people, but also thank them. And I love having lay people testify in church about the joy of giving, not the need to give because of a crisis, but the need we have as children of God to be generous because we were created to be generous, and how joyful that is.
It really is. I mean, it's part of why you mentioned the planned giving. You won't miss it at the end. But whenever I talk about planned giving, I say to folks, give some of it away now. It's a lot more fun to do and enjoy the joy of giving while you're alive. The other thing I would say here is I do a lot of comparing generosity, stewardship giving to the way we talk about and work with volunteers in the church. We do spend extra time with our volunteers in the church. because we're meeting with them about what's
Sure.
coming up or training or whatnot. We ask them specifically, would you teach this Sunday school class? Would you lead this? Would you do that? And we can do a lot of those same things with that lens through people who may not have the time to give, may not have the kind of skills that the church is looking for at that moment, but may be able to be and want to be financially generous in the same way that lots of people are generous with their time and their skills.
Mhm. And I think that the point is that one point has been made in the chat, and I think this is very important, that in the UCC, we often attract refugees from other religious experiences who maybe have been burned by, maybe they've experienced that name it and claim it sort of manipulative message. And so if we say something about money, does it trigger them or take them back to that place of trauma? And yet, I think that's why we do need to talk about money.
We
But
need to preach about it. We haven't talked about
preaching
that.
about it, exactly, preaching about it. Not just in stewardship, but really preaching about it. And I've heard some great sermons from pastors about, they're very honest, where it's about the awkwardness that that person has around money. Talking about what you were raised in your family traditions and the baggage that comes with that, or talking about if you were a part of a religious organization that was manipulative, to have those real conversations and let our members do it too. I think the truth will set us free on that stuff. So I would be remiss if I didn't conclude this by saying, I want to thank you all in the Churches of the Michigan Conference for giving that part of your budget, OCWM, called basic support. That's the part that goes to the Michigan Conference, and that's like pledges in a church. There are 5 different offerings in the UCC. It can get confusing, the little envelopes. The one that comes to us at the Michigan Conference is basic support. That's the bread and butter. And so I want to thank you for that. And in that tradition, we take a percentage of that you send us, and we send it to the national. So we also share and continue with that. And I'm so grateful to Andy for giving his time and being an awesome, not only national staff person, but an awesome participant in our clergy world here in Michigan. We really appreciate your gracefulness with serving the national church, but truly getting what it's like in the local church. I think we all really appreciate that. So let us conclude with a prayer. May the peace of Christ that passes all human understanding fill your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all.
Yes.
Happy to come talk in your churches, talk with you if you want.
That's right. And also, yes, you all can give us the ideas for upcoming Zooms. But the next one will be a good one.
Yeah, Sarah's great. And mental health is such an important topic for us all. I think we as congregations, worship is can be, I won't say it can be, a great tool for mental health. I'll speak personally, it is for me.
I love that. Well, you'll have to come back and join us for that one. We're excited. And that was one that came straight out of the congregations who were wrestling with this. And so we're excited to do that one. All right, well, peace be with you. And to Timothy in India, we will pray for you in your construction of a new church. God bless you. And take care, everybody.
Hello, praise Lord, everyone. I'm Timothy from India. Pastor Timothy from India. Thank you very much.